Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this webinar. I'm Aqsa Taylor, Senior Director of Product Marketing at Abstract Security. Joining me here today is Pablo Quiros from Juul Labs, and I will let Pablo introduce himself. Pablo, could you talk about yourself in a few words?
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I'm Pablo Quiros. I'm the Vice President and Global Head of Security and Information Technology at Juul Labs. I oversee our cybersecurity programs, infrastructure, cloud, architecture, and a number of other areas within the organization.
Busy person, Pablo. And next,
Yeah.
we have Francis Odum. You've probably already seen him in LinkedIn, but you haven't. Here's Francis himself. Francis, can you talk a little bit about yourself, please?
Thank you very much, Abstract, here for having me, and great to be here with you, Pablo. My name is Francis. I'm the founder and CEO of the Software Analyst Cyber Research. We're a research and advisory firm primarily focused on cybersecurity, and we have a global radio audience base of about 80,000 who read and engage with our work. And we do a lot of work and analysis on Security Operations Center, but we also do a lot of work around cloud security, identity, as well as data and AI. We help CISOs and security leaders think about best solutions or how a lot of these technologies are emerging. And we do a lot of research to guide practitioners on their roadmap. And then obviously prior to doing this, I've spent time leading product on AI and ML, as well as also just working in a number of organizations like venture capital, did a lot of cybersecurity research for firms there, and then working in a number of different sectors prior to leading, starting up this company. So it's nice to be with you and looking forward to talking about just the Security Operations Center.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Francis and Pablo. So actually, you recently published the Market Guide 2025 for security operations, and you made some bold statements in there about SIM platforms, and you talked about the emergence of data pipelines platform. So Francis, can you talk a little bit about the key trends and what you noticed, and what's the basis of that report that you published?
Yeah, for sure. I think a big part of what we did really was, and a lot of this came out from what we were hearing from leaders who've been used to their SIMs. There are not lots of, without maybe giving specific names, or I don't know if we're allowed to give specific names, but there are large SIM providers out there whereby the architecture hasn't quite scaled with the pace at which data volumes within the SOC are quite moving at. And I think many companies have felt as though they still have a legacy infrastructure that just can't quite keep up with the data volume that the modern SOC has to deal with, especially when we think about what's happening with the COVID, kind of like cloud adoption that happened after COVID, and now obviously with the huge amount of AI that's actually penetrating the enterprise. I think broadly speaking, a lot of those existing legacy infrastructure haven't. And I think what we started to hear from practitioners was they wanted more flexibility in terms of how they route and move their data. They're looking for a new architecture to actually help them filter out the most relevant data, index it properly, normalize that data, and then they have the option of moving it wherever they want to move it into. And so pretty much that's pretty much how this ecosystem, and based off that, we decided to generate and write the reports to really uncover who are the best vendors and what are the best vendors actually building to solve this, especially for vendors who are, sorry, especially for enterprises and security leaders who are dealing with a lot of legacy infrastructure as it relates to their SIMs internally, and the huge cost for all the amount of data volumes. And so that's really what propelled us. And we did a deep in-depth analysis of about 10 or so key vendors that were helping in terms of collecting data, managing and filtering, passing, tiering of data, and helping to cut down and reducing costs. Companies that are bringing around the convergence of pipeline and analytics. We also talk consistently about this evolving nature of the SIM and how the whole market is. So obviously happy to talk through some of the key findings, but at a high level, those were some of the drivers that led us to do that report. And it was all based off what's existing happening today.
Awesome. Thanks, Francis. And I'll get back to you on the key trends. But let me ask Pablo here. So you're coming from a consumer perspective, like as a CISO, as an information security leader.
The traditional SIM, like you have to think architecture, right? And like that's where this whole thing really stems from, is like the lack of versatility and hyper dependency of a platform in your architecture when you're using a linear model of origin of telemetry, destination of telemetry, right? So if you have one of your major back in the day, or when SIMs really started being developed, right, and you got all the three major players, no names, et cetera, right? Their architecture was designed so that they are the sole controller and provider of your telemetry, right? You have a forwarding agent that sits on the endpoints that collects the data and then sends it to its destination, right? You have a intermediate infrastructure that proceeds to ingest and index the data and then send it to a presentation layer, right? You have all this architecture that is designed with like an ecosystem in mind, where it's like, yeah, you buy our brand of product and the entire stack is ours. Everything from the presentation layer to the processing layer to the storage layer to the analytics layer, right? And that's how it's always been. Now, with the maturity of the organizations and the volumetric growth of telemetry, right, as you continue to build more systems and increase complexity in organizations and services, right, you companies start realizing like, hey man, kind of trapped, right? Like I have this provider, they have all of my data. I
Hmm.
can't move the data because it's expensive. I can't delete the data because I need it. I
Yeah.
can't migrate the data because it's expensive. And now they can just charge me whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That's what happens, is that once you have a petabyte worth of telemetry in a company that has to keep the data for 5 years, what are
Mm-hmm.
you going to do? Right? So because of that, I think at some point versatility becomes a topic of conversation, right? Where it says like, hey, like how do we solve this problem? Like how do we unhostage people from their decisions that they made years ago, right? And I think that's where the pipeline data brokerage industry comes into play, right? It's like, okay, let's build a mechanism that's an intermediary in between the origin of your data and the destination of your data, so
Mm-hmm.
that you can control where the data goes, how it goes before it gets to the destination.
Yep.
Which, the destination incurs a tax, right? Which is a license, right? In any major SIM provider, you ultimately pay for data ingested, right? So what that gives you is the opportunity to not only have some degree of fiduciary control of your data, right, and understand what you're spending, but to have build versatility and scale into your strategy, right? Because now the decisions you have more latitude to experiment, perhaps. You can say, hey, you know what? I have a data broker with pipelines built into everything. So you know what? I'm going to try this SIM. And if I don't like it, that's cool. We'll just rip it out and replace it, right? Like you couldn't say that, 5 years ago, right? You'd be like, holy cow, it's going to cost $4 million in 14 months to migrate from. Now it doesn't. So you can experiment. So it's a more competitive environment, which is forcing, the providers, the SIM providers and the data analytics companies
Mm-hmm.
to evolve a little bit, right? And perhaps improve product offerings that perhaps have been stagnant for a few years because of their dominance on the market.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a part of my spiel here, right? Was how I feel about it. And then how has it helped us? Well, in versatility. Again, that's the biggest thing I talk about whenever I look at one of these tools and whenever I make a selection. I'm very involved, as you may imagine, in our logging and infrastructure program. I'm one of the SMEs for this stuff, so I'm passionate about logging. But I don't want to build systems that are hyper dependent on decisions,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like I don't want to build all of our logging and detection strategy, all of our attack surface reduction strategy, all of our vulnerability management strategy. All of this relies on the quality and accessibility of our telemetry.
Mm-hmm.
So it's almost like every other program within security has a dependency on your logging program. So you don't want to build a logging
Oh,
program that is hyper dependent on one relationship with one vendor and one contract, where if things go sour, all of my infrastructure goes away, right? And I can't make decisions. Maybe tomorrow I'm a different company and I want to make a different decision, right? And I don't want to be handcuffed to somebody else renting me back my data, right?
oh,
So That's what makes sense, right? And then ultimately, there's multiple competitors in the pipeline space. We ended up going with abstract because it was easy to use, if I'm completely honest with you, right? Like having to build the maintainership is a factor,
Yep.
right? So like when you look into one of these tools, whether it's a SIM, whether it's a data broker, whether it's a detection platform, whether it's a tip, any tool that requires labor to produce a polished product,
Mm-hmm.
you have to quantify what that labor looks like when you make a decision around the tool, right? Because you may buy something that's like 50 grand a year, super cheap, but it requires 10 analysts to keep it running. Now it's, $3 million, right? So like these things have to come into consideration when you make these choices. And I think tools that are easy to use, easy to ramp up with, that require basic but understandable maintenance, that the learning curve is quick, are typically beneficial in environments where I don't have unlimited manpower to throw at the problem, right? Where I don't have like 50 analysts to go like, okay, guys, you got a year to figure this out. It's like, no, we need this thing like tomorrow.
So it's not just like having a tool for the sake of checking a box in a architecture, but it's about really having a tool that will give you back the control on your data strategy.
It's yeah, absolutely. And I also think, there's a big factor here. Times are changing, right? Security goes in waves, right?
Yeah,
We're not right now in a massive spending and security wave,
yeah.
right? Like we were back in 2021, for example, right? Where companies were burning cash in security. It's cyclical. It'll come back, but we're not there right now. So that means getting more bang for your buck, right? Like where can I use my money the most effectively? And that talks about people, about resources, about hours, as well as technology, right? It's not just which tool I'm buying, but it's like how many man hours is it going to take for we to achieve this objective with this tool versus with the other tool?
Yeah,
And that's a factor in the decision making, right?
absolutely.
But also to compound what you were saying about having control of your data, I think, like I said earlier, like I think people, like companies, I say people, but like I think people want to be able to make decisions. And I think that when you are locked into something
Mm-hmm.
and forced to stay into that something for years, once you can breathe, you're like, I want to make all kinds of decisions. I want to change everything, right? And that's just a natural reaction. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the more companies like you guys and the people in your space can do to provide value at the data distribution layer, the more effective it'll be, right? Like if you're able to, and I'm not getting technical for a second, but if you're able to do deduplication, if you're able to do enrichment pre-ingestion, if you're able to do matching pre-ingestion, if you're able to do data modeling pre-ingestion to reduce the expenditure on the SIM side of things, right? It's paying for less compute, less matching, less data, less processing. That's a bigger value proposition on your end, right? Where you can say like, yeah, we can match all of your TTPs and IOCs to your network telemetry before you ingest it so that it only goes in as a data model or a structure into your SIM.
Mm-hmm.
Just save the cost by 50%, right? So like it's a lot of value propositions when it comes to massaging data before it gets to where it needs to go.
I really love how you talked about like the architecture and how like if I were to put it in a sentence, I'd say it's about taking back control. So you're not locked in with a single vendor for life, right? Because you're locked in with the data being there and not being able to migrate because of the high expenses and also just the complexity, the amount of effort that it would take if there was not a platform in between routing that and making it easy for you to switch from one place to another. So thank you for sharing that, Pablo. Now, Francis, you mentioned previously, you of course you talked to a lot of organizations, information security leaders, as well as you talked to the new vendors or new tech space enthusiasts and such. So, what have you been hearing if you were to say like, hey, top three things I hear people say that they're facing, or in terms of like what's on top of their mind from a consumer perspective, from an information security leader perspective, what would you say you generally hear?
Yeah, because we cover four major verticals in cybersecurity, and those have different personas. Like security operations center has security engineers, a SOC analyst, You might have your identity teams that you might have them reporting to the CIO. You might have your data governance and privacy teams, and you might have your infrastructure team dealing with cloud and applications. And so we cover, and within each of those four verticals, there are really major trends we hear, but obviously, knowing a big part of our conversation is around security operations, and I could talk about what we see really happening in that ecosystem. I think right now, the biggest conversations I have these days are the role AI plays in terms of the triage and remediation of alerts. So obviously today, lots of SOC analysts and SOC teams are dealing with a huge amount of just alert fatigue in terms of a lot of false positives popping up, and they're just drowning in terms of the alert, and just humans can't necessarily keep up with it. And the role now is we're seeing a lot of new innovative companies evolving, building AI agents that are actually able to remediate and actually just cut down that MTTT mean time to detect as well as your mean time to respond. So that's been a major theme that I've been having, and many security leaders are actively thinking about what role AI plays in terms of maybe making your analysts much more productive, or even maybe shrinking some headcount of some sort as technology continues to mature. That's a big one. Obviously, a big one continues to be, I'm sure we're going to talk about this shortly, but just the huge cost within the SIMs. A lot of the old legacy SIMs have just not been able to keep up as well. So you have a lot of high costs. You still have problems around detection engineering in terms of just how difficult it is to manage and keep up with new detections, just because of just the threat landscape, and or detections continue to fail, breaking apart with a lot of your existing SIEMs today. And I think you also have a situation whereby organizations increasingly want to own their data. They want to have more control over telemetry that they're actually getting. And they're thinking about what's the best. Or should I be using some type of a data lake / traditional SIEM? Like, what does that infrastructure actually look like? I think obviously there's no one clear way. There are lots of discussions that happen. So there's different areas in which we're seeing a lot of major themes affecting leaders, but you can't go without talking about AI, and AI is definitely a big one within security operations today.
So what I'm hearing is your top three might be like the role of AI with alert fatigue, the expensive cost with dealing with a lots of data and SIM platforms, and third, probably just looking at tools to increase their efficiency in terms of
Correct.
operationalizing, right? And now let's talk about abstract in particular in this category for data pipeline platforms. Can you talk about why you focused on abstract and the key advantages you saw on how we're developing or how abstract has evolved in this space?
Yeah, I think at a high level, right? Like, there's a couple of things. Like number one, it's like I said earlier, it was easy to use. Like, it seemed easy to use at a glance. And then it was obviously confirmed by our engineers because we're actually using it now, and it was easy to use. But that was what caught our attention in the presentation, if I'm honest with you, right? We went into a presentation without looking to make a change in our current stack. So this wasn't something that we were exploring because we were purely, we listened to everybody. So we were like, all right, let's listen and see what they have to say, right? And
Pablo, if you don't mind, did you have even anything at all pre-abstract at all, or were they just net new? You just got to know about them. I'm just curious what your world looked like even pre-abstract at all.
the logging infrastructure at the place of my employment is very advanced. So that we have a very advanced, very mature program that I've spent. It's been the main focus of my had been the main focus of my role for the last 3 years until I obviously took over additional responsibilities here. But logging and detection has been my focus for the last 3 years at the company that I'm at right now, and it's a very advanced program. So we use one of the major providers. We had a data broker. We were using distributed architecture, multiple clouds, multiple retention dates, self-sanitation of data, deduplication, match parity, detection, response. Everything was built. It's fairly mature model. So, like I said, it was working, right? So we were not It wasn't something we didn't walk into this going like, oh, we need to replace such and such. It was more like, hey, yeah, this is interesting. Let's talk to these guys, and see what they have to say. And then they came and did a demo, and we were looking at building some pipelines and some connectors and stuff, and they're doing this live. And we said, no way. Like, there's no way that's a presentation. There's no way that's how it works. Like, and then we did a POC, and that's exactly how it works. You
Mhm.
just drag and drop things. And so our logging guys, they're looking at this and they're like, hold on a second, can I do this in like an hour? And they're like, bam, 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 like reconfigured an entire set of pipelines that would have taken like a week in a few hours. And it was kind of a resounding, yeah, we want to try it. And it came from our analysts, from our engineers. It wasn't, I was in one meeting, I think, maybe when the first meeting when this thing came along, and I wasn't involved after that until it came to make a decision. But the team, the actual practitioners that are using the tools, came back and said, like, yeah, we want to POC this, and we want to POC it like right now, right? So we went out of cycle and we did some testing and some POCing, and again, the team just came back with, yeah, this we need to be able to reduce the time we spend maintaining and managing our pipelines.
Mhm.
We need to be able to replicate this in case of disaster. Anybody that's not trained needs to be able to follow instructions, right? And the complexity of other tools in the market would require that you're trained to be able to follow the instructions, right? Even if if you have a tool that's as simple to use as you can build a notebook, so to speak, a white paper, a set of instructions, a run book, sorry, and somebody else can follow it, and if your tool is that easy to use, man, like that, it checks a number of boxes for us, right? So ultimately we went down that path of usability. And lastly, there was obviously a pricing component to it. This isn't a finance call, so I'm not going to talk about that. But I think it was significantly easier for us to use than what we were using before. Number two was our relationship with the company, which we haven't had a relationship for a long time, but they've been very open to working with us, right? This is obviously a very young product. We're aware of that as well. So we have some requirements that are set in stone in the sense of performance and in the sense of flexibility. There were a lot of things that we needed to exist. Some of them did not exist at the time of when we started our relationship, but they do now, and we work together to build these things, right? Our team has helped the guys at Abstract build content for their platform based on our needs, right? So we need to have connectors for X, Y, and Z, right? So we'll build them first, and then so it's been a healthy relationship, very back and forth. They're very willing to work with us. And then lastly, just again, I know I keep coming back to cost, and like I wonder, people are gonna think I work in finance or something, but it's a factor,
Yeah.
just the cost of ownership, like the cost of maintaining the infrastructure. Like when your SIM costs X amount of money,
Mhm.
and then your data brokerage tool costs X or X plus Y amount of money, then like I, at least in my perspective, you have a problem, right? Like when I'm spending more money on the tool that moves my data versus the tool that operationalizes my data, like, and it was just not it. This was an appealing proposition when it came to projected cost of cloud resources and compute intrazone connectivity fees and all that kind of thing. So far, as we're seeing, we've seen a significant amount of savings comparatively to our previous architecture, and we're happy with it. So it yielded. It was a good. Whoever thought that they should come do a demo for us, that was a good call, because we ended up liking the product and buying it, and it's been beneficial for, I think, both of us so far.
Yeah,
And
sure.
we even completed a massive migration. I'll tell you something else. Like, we even completed a massive migration from one cloud tenant to another without interruption of services, and we did it at the same time that we were onboarding Abstract. So
Wow.
we switched our data brokerage platform, and we migrated our SIM with all the historical data, all the knowledge objects, everything from one cloud provider to the other, and we did everything at the same time, and nobody even noticed.
Wow. That's
So
Thank you for that validation, especially not looking for something and then you end up like buying it and being a customer of it.
No,
It just speaks volumes. And thanks for giving
no.
Abstract a chance. And I'm happy also to hear that our marketing and our product are in tune. We don't do any fluff. Like we are easy to use in what we speak there. So thank you for that validation, Pablo. Francis, what are your thoughts from an analyst perspective? What do you see different about Abstract that you've talked about it?
Oh, honestly, I think Pablo has actually just highlighted everything. On our end, we spent time looking at all the vendors across the ecosystem, and I think I talked about 10 or about 12 that we did a full comparisons. And yes, I think Pablo has hit on most of them, but I think definitely one we hear with Abstract obviously is simplicity, relative to a number of other vendors on the market. We think another thing we heard about when we did our report was kind of like you guys' vision. I think you guys have made some really good progress, but in terms of actually trying to infuse detections early into the process, early into the runtime process at ingest. And I know obviously you guys too, but I think another big part we really liked was you guys' vision in terms of bringing detections a lot more earlier into the process, which just reduces how much work is required upstream later within the sim. And I think even Pablo highlighted that, but that was definitely something that stood out when we compared you guys to other ones. And I would say obviously like quick time to deploy, obviously is increasingly one as well that we definitely liked about what Abstract had to do. And then also you guys were fairly also you had also a lot more of the cold storage capabilities that also allowed your customers were like, hey, you know what, if you don't want to send everything to the CMA, you're just looking for somewhere to park some data that you don't need to push out, you can actually just use our cold storage. And we knew you guys had a lot more robust capabilities across there, as opposed to just doing only the pipeline that routing of data. I think those were a few things that we also really liked about Abstract, and obviously together with everything Pablo has actually mentioned.
Thank you, Francis. And yes, so for our viewers, if you are curious about what Francis mentioned on detections, please read our Shift Left blog. What we're doing is bringing detections closer to the edge, bringing it in real time, streaming threat detections in the pipelines itself, instead of waiting to route it to your analytics platform, store it, index it, and then detect through saved searches. So we're by moving detections left closer to the edge, we're reducing mean time to detect from hours to seconds. So Pablo, three reasons why you would recommend abstract security to anyone. And for my viewers, none of this was scripted, so all answers are just on the spot and true opinions of our guest today. All right, back to you, Pablo.
Yeah, I think I touched on it before. I think it's easy to use. Um and I've been hammering on that a lot, but and again, without going into details, right? Like these platforms are not generally easy to use. Like generally you have to, even for advanced people that are experts in other tools, right? Like it's still like, oh, I gotta figure this out. Like this is so confusing, right? Like this abstracts tool is pretty easy to use. Like our team, these guys are experts in other tools, and they were able to rapidly ramp up on this thing and do full migration and everything. So I think for practitioners or for leaders, like a tool that's zero to deployed and in use rapidly is a good use of your time and resources, right? I think that's one. I think two, their their willingness to work with you, I think like the customer service aspect of the company, like I think is from my perspective has been very, very positive, right? Like whenever we've had an issue, which will inevitably happen, right? Like they've been very quick to respond, they've been very quick to address it, very open to listening to our feedback and working with us. And I think that's something that's sometimes lost in bigger organizations. It's kind of like, well, this is what you get and that's it, right? Versus, hey, you know what? Like you're right. Let's actually try to fix this, and we appreciate that. And then lastly, I think there's a number of positives, but I think the cost of the infrastructure or the volume of the infra, I wouldn't say cost because it'll be different for everybody, right? But in our architecture, in our deployment, we were able to significantly reduce the amount of compute resources that we required to operate this technology at the same level of performance that we were operating the tool that it replaced.
Nice.
So one-to-one in performance, the requirement from a compute perspective was less. Now, is that because we were doing something wrong? Maybe. I'm not. This isn't a testimonial on best architecture principles or anything like that. But in our experience, that's how it panned out, right? Like we ended up using a significant amount of less compute, which translates to increased ROI, which translates to increased, fiscalization of the security budget, which allows us to pursue other initiatives and so on. So it's an overall benefit for the program. It's like, okay, I can save 150 grand here in infrastructure. I can use this for something else, right? Or give it back to the business or whatever you choose to do, right? And I think that's a huge positive for us.
Hey, Francis. So, same question to you. What are three reasons you would recommend abstract security from your analyst perspective to those who are looking at different solutions in the market?
Yeah, I think it would come down to a number of the key points we talked a lot about. I think number one is ease of deployment. I think ease of deployment, it's easier to set up and easy to actually use. You could get up and running within your environment relatively quicker. And I think for enterprises today that are really strapped on time, ease of use and quick deployment is a very, very key piece. I think that's one. I think number two, kind of heard this from Pablo as well, and I think other customers of theirs would validate this as well in terms of just how they're easy and open to receptive to feedback. And I do think I speak to a lot of security leaders, who, they're willing to work with earlier companies in general. But one of the reasons why they love to work with them is because they're responsive to feedback. They're able to almost build alongside them. And I do think the people at Abstract are always responsive to their customers' needs and always willing to meet them where they're at. And I've been able to see this just through a lot of technical demos and even just what I've heard as well. And last but not the least, as I've mentioned early on, we definitely see the role of which detections playing a role at the ingest point and how their vision for what they're doing in terms of like bringing that detections and reducing a lot of the upstream work that might be involved with your SIM. And I do like what they're doing there. And I do think it's a big part of how organizations are thinking about their future strategy. So I think those are broadly the core reasons. And I think maybe more of a thematic, broadly industry thing is cost-wise and flexibility of your data. You want the security data pipeline within your infrastructure to go about giving you that visibility in terms of your data and in terms of you filtering out a lot of data, especially if you're in a really old legacy SIM. So those are some of the key points that I would generally summarize.
Thank you very much, Francis. And thank you very much, Pablo and Francis, both of you, for joining us and for sharing your thoughts, your experience, and the recommendations with our viewers. We highly value each of your expertise coming from different angles, one from an analyst, one from an actual user, information security leader. And for our viewers, we will have links to different resources in the bottom. We'll also have a link to our book on applied security data strategy. It's not gated and freely available for you to assess where you are in your data strategy and how to get to the next phase of maturity. Thank you for watching and being with us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.